Stephen Lapthisophon.
Yes.
Thanks for coming in.
Sure. My pleasure.
So you're an interesting guy.
Well, we all have our things that make us interesting, right?
So you're an artist, and you also teach art at a university.
Yes.
And you're legally blind.
Yes.
And you were doing art before you were legally blind, correct?
I've been making art and showing art for quite a long time, but had vision loss in 94, I guess. So it's been a while.
So I'm going to be the class idiot today and just ask a bunch of questions a bunch of things I don't understand about art, and hoping that maybe you can shine some light on it.
Sure. Okay.
So I grew up in a very black and white family. In general, they look at art as like somebody that can paint, like Bob Ross type stuff. Like Bob Ross is considered art. And anything outside of that is just like somebody throwing paint on a canvas and walking away and calling it art. And then I've even questioned things like when I see the banana taped to a wall at like the Miami Art Fest that sold for $200,000 or something crazy. So can you explain kind of, there's Bob Ross type art, and then there's people that tape bananas to the wall. What are the differences in those? What do I see that's simpler? It's like, is it because one is like just easier to understand and one is more like a puzzle, or tell me what I don't get about that.
Sure. I think just generally art as a category encompasses a huge spectrum of activities and things and all sorts of just what the world is. I mean, what you're saying is, Bob Ross making a picture is image making of a kind, and I think that that's certainly part of what art making involves and has for a long time. But I think that even within the huge history of art making, there's always an underlying idea or a way in which artists are using image making as a way to say something. And I think sometimes there's art that is meant to be an image which decorates a space, let's say, or enhances it in some way that gives somebody pleasure. But then there's also the whole thing that encompasses the field of ideas or statements or those kinds of things. And I think that maybe for the last, couple of hundred years of the Western art tradition, there's an emphasis on using the activity of making art to engage culture in a way to say something, to make a statement, to be involved in ideas more than just, let's say, picture. So that's my beginning point, I would say. I don't know if that even helps to make sense. But so that when Maurizio, who had his activity of taking a banana on the wall, his point isn't about the same thing of just reproducing something that could be done, just like picture of a mountain. Okay, I'm going to make a picture of a mountain. It's more about engaging in society, making a statement about a cultural moment. That particular artist is somebody who is always engaged in provoking and trying to stir up trouble, controversially, constantly questioning what it is to make art, actually, in some ways. I mean, I think that for somebody like Catalan, his work is explicitly about wanting to have you, in fact, question exactly what was, maybe troubling you about it. I mean, it's not, his activity and his actions are never neutral in that way. I mean, I think he wants you to say, really? What the heck is this? That kind of thing. I mean, so it's not something that is immediately meant to say, well, of course this is art. It's meant to say, well, how far can we stretch what art is? And I think that artists have been engaged in this kind of questioning for quite a long time. It's taken a lot of different forms and a lot of different manifestations. But I think it's not quite as you said, black and white as you think. I mean, I think there are a lot of people who might, have made things that were, let's say, picture making of some kind that were really fundamentally much less about giving you something that looked like something than much more engaged in trying to make a statement or engaged in kind of like, how can I use this image to say something, to be engaged in ideas and that kind of thing. And I think that in the way that almost every cultural activity over the last number of years has been about pushing limits. You might have poetry that started out as describing something or an event and then became more and more about the sound of the words themselves and pushing the limit of, just how language sounds, how much maybe language can be broken down to be just language itself, things like that. You have that field that's pushing it. You have music that starts out as being maybe a kind of pleasant accompaniment to listening, whatever. And then you have musicians who want to push that and make it about just the sound itself and just seeing how much you can break things down and push a limit. And I think that in the visual arts, it's very similar. I mean, you have, ballet that it's illustrating a story. And then you have choreographers who do things that are much more about just movement itself and everyday movement and bodies that don't have to be only, let's say, pretty, but maybe more disjointed and odd ways that bodies can move. And so I think artists always want to kind of push the boundaries and push limits. One thing I will say is I think that there is a kind of expectation that art carries with it or carries the burden of that an audience expects that it's always universally understood and it should be accepted as such. And I think that as many things get more and more specialized over the last, I don't know how many hundreds of years, the expectation has changed a little bit. And I don't think that, I think there is a big gap between where the sort of vanguard of art making is and the expectations of what an audience might have. I mean, it is a specialized thing. But I think that there is still a kind of universal expectation that it should be always understood by anyone. And I don't think that's always the case. And the reason I say the burden a little bit is that I think it's one of those things that I don't know that every other field carries that. I mean, I don't know that people have a sort of normalized education and expect that they understand that there are certain scientific principles and
because I feel like I can understand most music. So whether it's dubstep or on one end of the spectrum, or it's Celtic music on another end, or it's orchestras on the other. Screamo is the only one that I have like a tiny bit of a hard time. I've always found really interesting that rap and country are almost identical. If you think about like what they talk about, they both talk about, one talks about B words and one talks about women, like country girls, it's like, it's this weird thing where they just like use different words where like one talks about beer and one talks about hard liquor, one talks about trucks and one talks about like fast cars. I don't know, like there's this weird thing where rap and country almost talk about identical things and yet their audiences appear to be very different. But so I feel like I can understand most music, but when I look at art, I feel like there's many art pieces I have a very, very hard time understanding. And so but sometimes things I don't understand I think are cool. So this is real embarrassing what I'm about to say. But the dude who painted the giant Campbell's soup can, who's very famous, who I should know his name.
Sure, Andy Warhol.
Yeah, Andy Warhol. I don't get it, but I think it looks cool. Like, like I'd have it in my living room. I was actually at Museum of Modern Art in San Francisco, and I think I saw some of his enormous paintings and I thought, well, this is really cool. And so I just look at it as like, oh, this is simple. I don't know, maybe it's worth 20 grand. Like, I don't know. And then I'm sure it's worth 100 million, but it's like in my mind, I'm like, oh, this is cool. Somebody some time made some giant paintings. But I'm not sure, is there a bigger goal? Is there more? And maybe that's what people are buying. They're buying the story behind the art and music. You don't really find that story. Like, I'm sure in Andy Warhol's paintings, there's more stories than just like a cool looking Campbell's soup can.
Well, I mean, a couple of things. I'll resist a little bit of your, and I'm not going to tell you what you do or don't understand. I can't, but you said, that you understand most kinds of music. I would say that I think that within the sort of commercial realm that popular music exists, I think you're able to differentiate and hear different things, but I think the contexts are always different. And I also think that there's a lot of, I think about maybe something like, more avant-garde music like Xenakis or Stockhausen or John Cage or Morton Feldman or even like Elliott Carter. I mean, I think there are things that there's always somebody who's at an edge. And I think that artists, there has been over a long period a kind of goal to be pushing a boundary at all points. So I think that's, whereas I think that maybe some kind of mainstream country and mainstream rap kind of thing, that it's not really about the same kind of thing. They're not about trying to push a limit to sort of see how far somebody can go. So I think these are different impulses, let's say. Regarding somebody like Warhol, who in many ways at this point was kind of a mainstream artist. I mean, it's not even... I'm not trying to say anything, whatever. I mean, it's like I think he's been fully absorbed into a kind of mainstream. It's funny. I have a lot of students who are maybe even like some younger artists who don't, maybe just their own upbringing or whatever, have not been to a lot of museums or galleries or whatever. And maybe their first impulse is, well, they were skilled enough to make a nice picture of something. And so they're limited in terms of even their own whatever, but they all know Warhol. So it's funny you bring up Warhol. It's like, but I mean, something like the early pop art images that he made, like the soup cans. I mean, it was, I think that, I'm not going to be a Warhol explicator or something like that, but I think a lot of it, what he's about was trying to, in fact, examine the kinds of things like skill and everydayness and the banality of what he was seeing around him, taking something that was as plain as it could be, most ubiquitous kind of like just everydayness that could be, and represent it to an audience in a way that asked them to see and examine and think about their own lives in a certain way. I mean, he was part of a generation that wanted to really examine what commercial life was like, about commerce, about marketing, about products, about how things were bought and sold, how art was becoming very much a kind of product more than it was something that was more of an aesthetic experience. And I think by taking something that was so plain and commercial and base in a certain way and then giving it back to somebody, he was making a comment on how art was being treated as, the same thing you might buy, like a can of soup or a car or a shoe or something, just anything, a product. And I think that, he was in fact saying those kinds of things by giving it back to somebody. Like, this is how you guys see art. Well, I'm going to give it back to you in that same kind of way. I think he was about making something that was he was reimagining what it was to make something. I think artists for quite a long time and for a lot of movements and a lot of activities have been really rethinking what it is to have skill, to be thinking again about sort of like the practice of what the hand does, what making is, all those kinds of things, what an object is to begin with, what an object is. I think there are a lot of artists who are really examining the idea of like what an object is, which I know sounds like a kind of rarefied thing. And what somebody says, I just want something that's nice to look at. It's like, well, that's fine. People do that, and that it works in that way. But I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. But it also means that It's just not the same as other kinds of activities. Like I was I'll go back to a little bit of what I was saying about specialization. I mean, I think that, there's a lot of ways that we learn certain things and that they come up to a level, and that's fine. But then there are things that go beyond that are meant for a specialized audience. I think that there are a lot of things that exist in the realm of scientific investigation where we know what we need to know. We know that we rely favorably on the idea that this is going to sit there, and we'll expect that it's not going to float out into the air. We know that that's a reliable kind of assumption. But we don't know that we necessarily know all of we don't know the same thing that somebody who's investigating subatomic particles or a specialized physicist knows, but we don't need to. There are assumptions that we know what we need to know because that's what we're interested in. And I think that's similar to, a lot of things happen in art making and in art in general. I mean, I think people gravitate towards the things that they're interested in and that they like. And there's nothing wrong with that, but doesn't mean that the things that maybe go beyond that aren't valid also. It's just a more intense or more complicated or more, it's an investigation of what art can be in a bigger way. I don't know if that makes any sense.
I think it made some more sense than I did when I asked the question. I think, tell me about your art. Now that we've kind of gone over art as a whole, when you're making art, what are you trying to achieve? What do you want people to feel? Do you want them to feel anything? Like, what's the end goal of your art?
Well, like I said, I've been making art for a long time. I've done a very wide range of things. I've done drawings, paintings, sculptural things, video, sound art, photographs. I have a lot of writing that I've done. I think most recently, the last show I had was 10 paintings, very simple in that regard. But then sometimes there are things that are a shelf with potatoes on them. So, it's a wide spectrum of things. I think the thing that holds a lot of the work together is that I do a lot of things that are meant to refer to other art, actually. That a lot of things are meant to engage with and have a dialogue, conversation with past art. I do a lot of things which are honoring other artists and wanting in some ways to evoke a past art movement to kind of honor those kinds of things. It's very important to me. I think a lot of the work that I do is driven by a kind of emotional, intuitive engagement with the moment of a certain way. Sometimes there are a lot of things that are about commenting on the time that it's made and the time in which it's shown. So while it may not be direct, let's say, social commentary, there are a lot of times when I think a lot of the work that I make is engaged in saying something about something that's happening in our moment, but not necessarily in a very direct way. Although, pardon me, although sometimes that is. I'm not tied to something that, it's funny that in your sort of like quickie questionnaire before got here, you were talking about, and I know that you're very much involved in business and marketing and those kinds of things. And it's like, and there are a lot of artists who absolutely strive to make something that might be considered a brand. And I know that's a part of the world we live in. And that's just like completely antithetical to everything that I do. I want my work to be very spontaneous, to be driven by a kind of improvisation about sort of reflecting where I am in my moment and that moment, and to be driven by a kind of search for something new, something unknown, something that is a surprise, that invokes a kind of sense of wonder in somebody, those kinds of things. I think that for me, when art making becomes a kind of repetitive habit or reproducing something that is the product, then it's already lost to me. I think that what artists should do is lead somebody to an unknown place where the sense of discovery is foregrounded. And so that's something that I strive to do. So while I think that there are people who maybe know what I do or have followed what I do for a while, maybe say, oh, well, that's something, I recognize that as a move you do or something I see. But and we all have things that we,
are part of our brand.
Well, I mean, we do things that I think are comfortable to us. But by the same token, I also, I mean, I need myself to surprise myself, to go to a new place all the time, to push myself into places that are unfamiliar. So I don't know if that helps any, but I mean, just like I say, I mean, I've been making art for over 40 years. So the arc of the things that I've done, I think probably I hope, and to me they do, make sense as I move from one type of thing to another, one exhibition to another, one movement to another, one time, whatever. And so I think that the activities have a flow and a coherence, I think, and I hope. But at the same token, I don't know that I can say I do this is what I do. It's like, boom, it's that kind of thing. And a lot of artists now, that I mean, I'm not denigrating anything, but that it has become a little bit of what some people do. There are a lot of artists who are involved in things that you might think of as a kind of project. You might say a kind of, I do this equals that, this equals this, and blah, blah. I mean, I don't operate that way. I don't think that way. I don't believe in it. But I think it's a little bit of what the world is about now. I mean, I think the world wants explanations. I think I'm definitely much closer to Mauricio Catalan's banana peel than I am to Bob Ross. So.
Is it possible to make a living in today's climate if you aren't on the, I'm going to use Alec Monopoly, or like somebody who just draws, like he draws Monopoly people on buildings and cars, and like his entire brand is around like this same drawing 800 times, or the dude that makes like the giant $100 bills. I don't know if you've seen that guy. Like there's just like these people that like have a brand of how they do it. Like one of my favorites, I don't know the guy's name, but and this is to me very unique and very cool. He takes aluminum cans and like shapes them into sculptures, and he has some really cool looking sculptures. I just can't justify, at my current financial state, $5,000 for an aluminum can that looks cool. But I think it's art. I think it's really cool.
I think there's a way of making a living doing any number of things. I don't know how to say. I mean, I've never, quote unquote, supported myself exclusively by selling art. My work has a small following, and I have a few collectors who pay attention to what I do, and work gets sold. And I've worked with galleries over the years, and I've worked with my current gallery, or my most important. I mean, I work with Conduit Gallery in Dallas. My first show was there in 2003. So it's been a while, and it's been a steady, like every other year kind of show, and things sell, and people know my work. In some ways, I had a big show by myself at the Dallas Museum of Art, and I've had work at the Nasher Sculpture Center and things like that. So, I mean, I think
that place is crazy.
So, I mean, I think I have a livelihood making art, but as you mentioned, I mean, I teach at UT Arlington, and that's where I'm able to make a living.
You make
to support
$400 million
myself.
a year. That's what made you a billionaire.
Yeah, right. Well, no, that's what keeps the mortgage paid for barely. But no, I mean, I make a modest living through all of it. But I've never done something for the purpose of making money. And I think, in fact, a lot of my art is very much about humble materials, modest materials, everyday stuff, those kinds of things. I mean, a lot of the actual physical stuff I use is, in fact, trying to investigate simplicity and materials that aren't fancy and that are not showy and not whatever. I mean, I'm really about that personally. Now, I mean, there are many artists, and some are even friends, who I know that, one of their priorities might be selling art, making things for sale, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, and there are people who absolutely do it, and there are superstar artists who do make many millions of dollars. I mean, there are many artists for whom, you said you didn't have $5,000 spent on a work of art. I mean, there are a lot of artists who spend $5,000 paying their support staff of their crew who work for them every day. So
my good friend Blake, there's behind these curtains are paintings that my friend Blake paints, and I think his payroll is like $20,000 a month for his support staff.
Yeah. So absolutely one can. Again, it's back to the thing I was saying earlier. It's like, the big umbrella of what art making is a wide, vast thing. I mean, there are people who have a hobby painting bluebonnets on Sundays once a month, and it makes them happy. And there are people who, whose paintings sell for, there's a waiting list for them, and they're $10 million. So, I mean, it's just a huge range of things.
So would you say that you paint for yourself and not for others? And if others want to buy it, that's fine. But you're never creating things for other people?
No, I mean, I would say I think an audience is essential. To me, I think that it's about that kind of connection to somebody else. I think art making is a social act. I think that it really needs the connection to somebody. So I wouldn't say that I make it for somebody else, but I definitely, I'm aware of an audience. But I don't think that I would say I make it for myself to sort of make myself happy or anything like that. And I think that there's the cliche that a lot of artists sometimes say, it's a therapeutic act for me. It's not therapy for me. It's not therapeutic, and it doesn't make me happy in that way. But it's about getting my ideas out. It's about using the activity to say something. So, I mean, I would say that's the reason that I do it in that way, is to make a statement, to engage with cultural history, what cultural production is, that kind of thing.
So take me to the beginning. When did you start painting? How did you get into it?
Well, I've been making art ever since I can remember. I mean, even when I was a little kid, I mean, my folks were very supportive, and, I'd go to, special art classes and special art camps in the summers. And even when I was a kid, I grew up in Houston, and I would ride my bike and take the bus to go to museums and stuff like that, even when I was like 11 and 12 and stuff like that.
Did you have any mentors?
There was a high school teacher who was very important, who was very supportive. I think I was always fairly precocious. I mean, when I was in high school, I had a gallery in Houston that was showing the work,
So you had your first gallery, your work was displayed in gallery when you were still in high school?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And it was actually a fairly prestigious gallery. I just went in and had the stuff under my arm and said, "You want to show this?" And the guy goes, "Okay." So
what was the stuff?
There were some odd drawings that were very derivative of a lot of contemporary art that was being done at the time, but they were handsome, I think. I don't know, in some ways. I think he actually sold one or something like that. But it got me feeling like I've always had a fairly kind of just do it kind of attitude.
See, me too, but it was all for financial gain.
Yeah.
Like I wanted to do it because I wanted the end result of cash.
Yeah.
And not in like a greedy way, but just like, I'm going to build this or do this so that I can make this. And, whatever I do with the money could be good, could be bad, whatever. But it was like, I loved helping people, and I knew that the outcome of helping people was making money, and I was excited for that outcome.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's funny. I don't know. I've never I've never been good at making money, and I've never thought about it much. It's really been about the work,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Anyway, I've been making stuff since I was, like I say, since I was a kid. I was involved in politics when I was a very young person. The mentor was my mother's father. My grandfather was very important to me. And my mother's whole side of the family were very much involved in politics. So a lot of the early work, in fact, had a kind of social edge to it. I went to undergraduate school at UT Austin, where there was an excellent group of younger artists as faculty, and there were people who were very instrumental in being supportive, and it was a lively place to do things. I went to graduate school at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and stayed in Chicago for 30 years. I went to Northwestern for a little while there and studied comparative literature and literary theory. But also, even when I was in graduate school, I had a gallery there also that was a really good gallery, an excellent place that, again, I just kind of walked in. I was like, I'm interested I like what you do, and can we talk? And ended up showing there for quite a while. And I showed at a lot of nonprofit kind of spaces, artist-run spaces, and I was involved in organizing exhibitions as well. I've always done that. And then I was there, like I say, I was in Chicago for many, many years, and was definitely part of that art world there, the art scene in Chicago. I feel very close to Chicago in many ways. And it always kind of kept touch with some Texas folks and that kind of thing. And around 2001, too, I was communicating with with a mentor, Rick Pertel, who was a really important figure in Dallas and an important art historian and curator, and invited me to do something in Dallas and teach a class and do an exhibition. And so that was the beginning of coming to Dallas, and I started coming back and forth. And then in 2007, I was reevaluating another 6 months of winter in Chicago and was feeling very supported by my gallery here and decided to move. So I've been here since 2007 in Dallas. But, making work all the time, all along. And the work has taken, like I say, many, many forms. I did, make paintings when I was in Austin in undergraduate school. And then I went in and out of making kind of things that would be thought of as paintings, although they might, they were on the wall, but, they might not be, in your in your field of expectation. But then I did a lot of things on paper. I did a lot of things that were installations. I did some things that were some plays, some performance art, installation type things. I really have always tried to push myself to do something that was, just to push the boundaries and examine, the limits of what was possible. So I've never, done just one thing. It's always been, I enjoy making a lot of different things. I mean, it's just always been important to me.
Tell me about the kind of social issues while you were in high school that you're painting about, or some of the...
Yeah, I mean, in 1968, I worked for the presidential campaign of Gene McCarthy. My mother's side of the family, like I say, were very political, and they encouraged me, and I was a kid. I mean, but it was one of these things that I just went in and volunteered, and they said, okay. And there were some young people. Most of the young people were college students, and I was 12. But it just kind of lit the spark of wanting to be engaged with, certain kinds of social justice kind of things. And at the time, it was anti-war politics mostly. And so some images I made were involved in that. And I was also drawn to a lot of artists who explicitly used, political issues in their work. My mother was from the Midwest, but did a lot of her study in Mexico City. And so we would visit Mexico City a fair amount. And so I was drawn to a lot of the Mexican muralists who had really explicitly sort of political dimension to their work. And that was really important to me, seeing that since I was really young until, I kept going and things like that. So I saw a lot of that work. So it would infiltrate into the work, just talking about, just like I say, I was probably aping a lot of the things, like Orozco or, Clemente, and, just certain Sigueros, certain Mexican muralists, depicting issues of power and injustice and things like that. And so, I think that's probably where a lot of that stuff, just what I was looking at. So it kind of came out in the work. So, yeah.
And so this guy's running for president. Are you working on advertising campaigns with your art, or was it used in that context?
No. Actually, I had one thing that I can tell you what happened pretty much. I went down and I volunteered and said, I'm happy to help. And they're like, oh, okay, just you can help. I was like, what do you want me to do? It's like, just go through files, all the kind of things that, this is a long time ago, stamps on envelopes and, those kinds of things, passing out leaflets, just real down and dirty, kind of stuff. And then when Robert Kennedy was assassinated, the McCarthy people got all of the Kennedy information and files and all of their stuff, basically. And it arrived in all these boxes, and everybody was so shocked and saddened by the event that I think it took a little bit of time for people to kind of really process it, as they say, And I remember I said, well, if all of those people are there, they should probably support what we do. They brought us all this material for a reason. People were like, okay. And I said, well, I'll call them. And I just got all the folders out that had their supporters. And I just got on the phone every day and called them, and I said, I'm calling from the McCarthy campaign. I know that you worked for Bobby Kennedy. We'd like you to work for us. And I just ended up enlisting all of their volunteers to work for us. And so I became in the head of all the volunteers. And I just
age 12.
Yeah, I was. I met Gene McCarthy. I met Henry Fonda and Arlo Guthrie and all these people who were just coming through. And it was me and this 60-ish Scandinavian woman. I don't remember her name, but I remember it was she was from Sweden, I think. And the two of us just called everybody, and we just enlisted all these people. And they were like, okay, you can do it, fine. Because I think a lot of people were they were so shell shocked by what had happened that I think it felt like we were cannibalizing these other people. And I'm like, yeah, maybe, but they're out there. We should make sure they know where to go, And so I just got on the phone. So I took the bus down there. It was in the summer. I was out of school. I took the bus down there every day and sat on the phone most of the days when I wasn't out in the street passing out leaflets and stuff. And it was just getting recruiting people to work for us, and then things would build from there, and things would build, and things would build, and the more you got one little bit of one supporter leads to another kind of thing, So yeah. So that's, and then I kept with it, and people. And then in the 74 other campaigns, there were people who I met, and they were contacted me, and they're like, we remember what you did for the McCarthy campaign. Will you come work for us for this? And I was like okay, and then. I just kind of built from there. And like I said, it was my mom's family, and she and I would do things together. And, I got involved in certain kind of things, when I was in school, of just organizing students for doing certain, causes and things like that. And just kind of built. When I moved to Chicago, and when I was in undergraduate school in Austin, I don't think I did. I didn't do as much. It was really, a lot of it was through high school. When I was in undergraduate school, I would, certainly go out and work on things, but I was too absorbed in school and in making art and in really just diving in completely to my own art making. And then when I got to Chicago, I didn't do as much at all, because Chicago I moved to Chicago in 1977. So it was, Chicago is always this way, but in terms of being a very, politics in Chicago is Chicago politics. It's what it is. And, and it wasn't a thing where it was the same kind of thing where you could just kind of go in and say, hey, can I help out? And be like, who are you? It's do do you know somebody? And so, it wasn't the same kind of thing. So I think some of that died down. I mean, I think I've always been, wanting to do, wanting to be active and do the right thing. But in terms of organizing and getting out, I just, I think the art making took over. But I did a lot of art when I was first in Chicago that was, let's say, more explicitly political in some ways. And that is, I think has diminished over the years. I mean, my relationship between what I think of as political art and things that are maybe not quite as explicit in message has diminished over the years. But that was early on. So.
Do you still feel desires to get involved? Like, do you think that you changed as a person of caring less about politics the older you got, or did you just care less about making art about it?
I think both. I mean, I think I definitely feel like, there isn't I feel my belief in what a political message is in a work of art has evolved. I also feel like a lot of the world has changed to a certain extent, and I think I might have different position on just a lot of issues and might be in a state where I don't know, I don't feel as connected to certain kinds of political action in the same way that I did when I was younger. I mean, I still, I vote and I try to do the right thing and, those kinds of things. But I just don't see, I don't know. I mean, I just do think that, the world's changed in certain ways, from passing out leaflets in the street to, the way information is exchanged now. I mean,
yeah.
It's a different world. So,
yeah, it's so interesting hearing that you've done art your entire life, because that makes you a true expert. If 10,000 hours is like expert status, you've done way more than 10,000 hours. So I guess I'll lead into, what have you learned about art making over doing 20, 30, 40,000 hours of doing it? Like, what are these big takeaways that you feel like you can only learn by doing the work?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, in some ways, I probably can say that all I can speak about is myself. On the other hand, I don't think that's true. I mean, I think that what I've learned is that let's see. I think that, I guess what I'm trying to say, what I'm tossing around in my head is trying to differentiate what I think I know from my own art making and what I've learned and what I know about myself and my own work, and then the things that I've learned by many years of teaching as well. So it's a kind of like back and forth. It's a funny thing. I mean, I think that, I really believe that we make art with our bodies, that there are certain fundamental things that go along with each medium of art making. I make a lot of drawings. I think that whatever the work ends up looking like, that drawings are still about the hand, tool, and surface. And that's all it is. And it can take 100 different manifestations, but that's still fundamentally what it is. I think that paintings are fundamentally about somebody standing in front of something on the wall and facing the unknown every time, whether it ends up being a snow-covered hilltop, or it becomes
some happy little trees,
or it becomes a can of soup. Either way, it's about a human standing in front of a flat surface and going, what am I doing here? confronting that unknown. So, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is I think that each type of activity in the world of art has, I guess I would say over the years, part of what I've learned is that is to sort of distill some of the things to their essence and to their sort of fundamental kind of like, what is this activity? And I think that just, as I make more and as I teach, that's, the kind of like thing that I'm trying to get at is like, what is it that we're fundamentally doing with this activity? And I do completely believe that art making is about making that connection to an audience, to a receiver. I think that artists have an impulse to do something, but that they aren't really fully the owner of whatever the meaning is, that I think the meaning is completed by the person who sees it and receives it. I'm a big believer in the idea that the perceiver, the receiver, the audience is the person who completes and makes the meaning. And then it takes that connection to be fully complete in that way. I like I say, I mean, I also, I think, it's funny, when we started out, you were talking about what you sort of feel like you understood and what you didn't. And I think that, quote unquote, understanding is a little overrated. I don't know that people actually understand as much as they sometimes
they just have an accepted reality in their head.
There's just like a level of comfort.
Check, yeah.
The level of comfort that they've gotten up to, and it's like, okay, it's fine. I kind
yeah.
Because I think that I mean, I'm one of those people who, I mean, I've been lucky to travel a fair amount, and much of that travel has involved museums, wherever that is, and looking at other art. I'm a really big believer in artists knowing art history and studying and those kinds of things. But, I mean, museums are filled with art that people go to, but, the reason that I think they return to pieces and to return to works of art that are 100, 200, 300, 400 years old is not because they understand them, it's because they continually don't. And I don't think that's bad.
Yeah.
I think they go back for that sense of wonder of like, I've seen this 10 times. I'm still not sure why this is this, and I think that the things that people think that they do, quote unquote, understand are easily dismissed. I mean, that's just, I really do think that we return to things over and over again because of a sense of wonder and a need to engage, a need to understand.
See, I always wonder if people almost make up their own what it means. So they keep returning to a painting and magically seeing new things, or it's just like, what if all this is just because you've looked at it a ton of times? Well, I think if you did anything, like if somebody looked at this, I have 2052 across this table, and if somebody just kept looking at it every day, and for some reason thought I was way smarter than I was, or way more creative than I was, I'm sure they'd come up with some magical reason or idea of everything, right? Like that's what I tend to think, is that people, if they find what they're looking for. So if they're always looking for something new, they just gotta always find something new.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like I say, I believe that it is the receiver who makes the meaning. I think the artist doesn't make the meaning. It doesn't mean anything until it's received. Now, the artist may have some things that they intend. The artists may have things that they are interested in. The artist may have things that they want to do or want to talk about. But it really takes the person, excuse me, who receives it to complete that gesture, that activity, that event. And now it doesn't mean that the audience is always right. I mean, somebody could look at something and go, I think this is about this, and be like, what are you, out of your mind? I mean, I'm not saying that any aberration or any kind of like flight of fancy is always correct in making the meaning. That's why we do things as a group. That's why it's a social act. There's certain levels of consensus. Most people end up believing that this painting by Caravaggio or somebody, is kind of about this feeling or this activity or this is what's going on. And it becomes accepted and it becomes part of the canon of meaning that has been constructed. And that social construction becomes part of culture. But at the same time, there's the kind of thing where things do change over the years. I mean, what something meant in a Manet painting that meant whatever it meant, when it was made, means something different, 150 years later, just because things have changed.
Yeah.
The world has added on to it in its own way. It's like, people talk about how, certain kinds of foods have a life to them, and works of art are the same thing. Works of art grow, evolve, change, add new meanings, new things as time changes, as the world around them changes. People, their own perception is different. Everybody, the layers of history add on to the works. People's perceptions, people's own lives flow into them, and those things become a different kind of situation. I mean, if it was, it's like scientific discovery. I mean, the idea, like in Thomas Kuhn's idea of the structure of scientific revolutions is that, that there are paradigms and paradigm shifts and things add and things, there are certain things, if we only knew what we thought about certain things in the biological or physical or chemical world, and those things were fixed and they never changed, we'd never grow. And it's the same thing with works of art. Our understanding of the societal understanding of race, class, gender, all those things have changed so that we look at a painting by, a great American master like Sargent, of some of those amazing, stunning portraits of society people from his time. Well, there's no way that they can mean the same thing that, they now that they did when they were made. I mean, there's just no way. Our understanding has changed. Our lenses have adapted. So, I mean, I think that, I think audiences construct the meaning, but audiences change also. And I think that that's why cultural activity is interesting, why it's challenging, why it's vital, and, why it's ongoing. It's that kind of thing.
Yeah. I think that maybe I've grown up trying to do everything for a mass market. So like my first intro into anything design was like t-shirt designs. I'm like trying to sell as many as possible. And then I got into web design. It's like, well, you're trying to make websites that are attractive to broad audiences for the most part. So don't you build a website that's a specific audience. And even when I'm teaching our design staff on websites, I use examples of like very rarely, except for the new products, but for the most part, people agree that Apple makes attractive products, but they haven't agreed that on like the Android side. And so I've always used the term is that like in art and design maybe are slightly different, but good design is not debatable, or like amazing design is not debatable. Good design's debatable. So like when the design's right, the design's right. And so art, I think, is maybe hard for me because I see that there's this, it's not always about everybody liking it. It's about a certain person liking it. And when you're doing copywriting, they teach you to write to one person. It was so funny. There was, I remember I was in this copywriting course and I took this, write towards, like, find one person you want to write to. And so I write this, I published a blog post, and a week later that person I was writing to became my client. So like they read it, and they were like, oh, this really resonates with me. And I was like, thinking to myself, well, it was written exactly about you. They actually still don't know this to this day. I should send them that. And so when you're looking at art, like you're looking for an audience, and typically it's not the world, but it's not one person, right? It would be you're looking at like a culture movement that's going on, or a culture.
Yeah, no, keep going.
Well, I was just saying, like when you.
Well, I mean, I think that, I think the other thing I would say is,
like, if the end purpose of art is not for yourself, but is for an audience, what if you get the audience wrong? Just bad art?
I mean, I think that artists do. I mean, again, there are as many flavors of artists as there are, everything. So, I mean, everybody's different. But I think fundamentally, I think there is one thing that many artists make what they want to look at themselves, let's say. So there is that kind of audience of themselves that exists. I mean, I don't think many artists, I'm sure that there are, but let's just
in general,
let's just not be happy for the self-loathing artists who just make something that they don't want to. They hate themselves, but so we'll just bracket that, okay? But so mostly, people make something that pleases them, and they hope that other people will like it. But I think that I hear what you're saying, and the only thing I'll say is that. You said, like, what if people don't, the audience doesn't work? Does it not work? I think, it's hard to say, because, I mean, there are countless artists who, have been doing something for a long time and nobody quite got it. And then years.
It just hit.
Years go, I mean, audiences are fickle. There are, ways in which they're constructed. There are things that happen in, let's say, quote unquote, the art world, the people who are maybe a knowledgeable audience, and there are trends there too, where there are artists who fully embrace whatever is of the moment and try to be part of it, and just, they very much want to be accepted, and they know that this is hot, and so I'll give you what you want. And there are people who just don't care about it at all, and they're in their own world and they do what they want to do, So, I mean, I think there's just a lot of different activities. I guess what I'd like to say, though, is that I think audiences are always conditioned by the moment and their particular social environment, social context in which it exists. Meaning there isn't also a universal kind of thing. I think that's the other thing that I think there's a funny expectation by sometimes people that there is a universality. And I think that museums get burdened with this kind of expectation. So that, I mean, I've given a lot of talks and I've whatever, and sometimes there are people who, come into a situation where it's like, I do this, for a living, and blah, blah, blah. And I come in a museum and I expect this all makes sense to me, because art should be universal and everybody should get it, and everybody this. And it's like, no, I don't, drive down to the University of Chicago and knock on the door at the place where they're doing subatomic particle physics research and saying, explain this to me. I should understand, what's, this whatever physics you're doing. I mean, I don't have that expectation, but people expect that from art. They expect that, if it's there, it's and especially if it's in a museum. There's this funny kind of thing that museums get, like I say, burdened with, I would say. And I think it's unreasonable. I think actually it's probably there, and museums go way out of their way to make the work to touch people and explain and give context to sort of make sense of things. But I think there's just a way in which I think, people have this expectation.
What are your thoughts on digital art?
I think that any number of things can be used to. I think anything that's interesting can be,
Because to me, it's less powerful because it's a mouse, right? Like that's my struggle with it. It's like, well, I'm good friends with an artist who's actually he might be in his 80s now, and like he does his stuff as a mixture of photography and then like Photoshop with the photography, and I've just always never really got it because it's like, well, all you did was you had a print, all you did was like throw something and then print it and then show it at a gallery. And it's like, to me, like, again, it's I have the struggle where it's like I want to see somebody work for something. So when somebody duct tapes a banana, I'm like, they didn't work. So
I think there's all kinds of, like I say, I think that there's been for quite a long time, a reexamination and a kind of reevaluation of what skill is and all those kinds of things. And I think that there are a lot of things that I think I enjoy that demonstrate a certain kind of mastery and that interests me. But there are also times when somebody might do something that is even less effort than the duct tape and the banana than I might be interested in. So it just depends to me a lot of times on how that idea is made manifest. I mean, it's funny because I do teach drawing as one of the main things that I do. And there are times when I have some students who want to, and we have a lot of people doing certain kinds of digital things, whatever. To me, a lot of times it's not so much that it is made with a mouse. It's more that just the result ends up being kind of flat and kind of just, I know there's just some qualities of it that just don't work with me.
Yeah.
That may be a generational thing for me. And I do like, physically the act of the hand in seeing certain things, all that kind of thing. So, to me, sometimes it's not so much the fact that like how it was made. It's just that what ends up being made is sometimes not what interests me. I don't really care how it got done. It's just more that it's like certain things end up having a look that doesn't interest me at the moment. It's not a judgment that's made on the basis of the fact that it was made in the machine. It's more just sometimes that things have a certain kind of look that ends up that it's like, this isn't for me. I will say, and I don't think we have enough time and for my brain or that I want to spend time, whatever, today. But some of the
NFT.
Yeah, I don't get it, and it doesn't interest me. But so it's just funny. But but that's another story.
The problem with everything in that NFT market, the digital market, is nobody actually knows how it works. Like everybody. Can you turn my headphones up a little bit, maybe? Check. Okay. Everybody claims to know how it works, but it seems like nobody actually knows how it works. People love to use blockchain and you buy your artwork and then here's this code that you can type in that shows you that you are the owner of the artwork. And it's like, okay, it's just a code. I'm the only one with that code. That's all that means. And anybody else can look up that code and see that my mailing address is linked to it or whatever. But yeah, I'm just as confused too. If they made it easier, and I get the whole idea is to use a cryptocurrency to buy it. But if they just made it where you could use a credit card, I'm sure that would simplify things.
Yeah, I've let it go as one of those things where it's like I got too much else to worry about right now. It's like so.
Okay, I want to dive into you going blind.
Okay,
that was in 94.
Yeah, 94.
So up until in 93, you could see fine.
Yeah, it was pretty immediate. Years ago in Chicago. Well, I'm trying to think when that first. I didn't teach initially when I was in or teach a lot when I was in Chicago. I did occasional classes, but I wasn't doing what I do now, which is full-time teaching. I worked in restaurants to make a living and worked in really great restaurants. I was pretty lucky. And I also mostly Italian restaurants. And I got really involved with the wine end of things in restaurants.
Dude, I'd eat all the bread.
And I went from working as a waiter, and then I was, sommelier, and then I went from that kind of thing to working from being in the restaurant side to selling wine. So I worked for some distributors there, which involved, driving around to a lot of different places. And it was just, I was downtown Chicago, and I, just like looked up at the sign and the light and whatever, and I was like, well, it's not right. It's like this side is just not working. I used to wear glasses, and I just, I think I wore glasses since I was like, 13 or something like that. And I had gone in, pretty current with that moment and gotten a new prescription and new glasses. And it was like, this is not working. And I was like, okay. So I went that day. I just was able to. I drove to the eye doctor, and I said, something's. I said, I think maybe they didn't do the prescription right. Can you check to see if, something's, whatever. And, I said, I just, like, immediately, not immediately, I said, fairly suddenly, I said, this is not working. So they said, okay, well, let's check this out. And they said, the typical thing, the ophthalmologist, it's like, look at the screen and this and that. And I said, well, what about, can you start reading this stuff? And I was like, I can't see it at all. And they said, you can't, you see, like, it's projected now. And I'm like, no, I can't. And so it was like, he said, when did that happen? I said, it was fast. It wasn't like a gradual sloping off or anything like that. Anyway, so they got very concerned. And they said, well, that kind of suddenness is not good. And I said, so you need to go to see my partner at the hospital who is a neuro-ophthalmologist. And they said, this is probably something that's neurological, if something that happened that quickly. So I went that same day. I probably actually shouldn't, I don't know if that makes any sense, but I was in Evanston, which is, on the North Shore, and then I drove downtown to Rush Hospital, which is right in the middle of downtown. I probably shouldn't have been driving, actually, at that point. But actually, that was the last time I drove anywhere, actually. Now that I think about it, I hadn't even thought about it. But yeah, that was the last time I was driving. And I went to the doctor, and he said that kind of quick, steep inability to see. My right eye was not as bad, but the left eye had like completely just like, was like just, shut down. I can see obviously a lot of big things and whatever, but I lose a lot of details. So anyway, I can see the outline of, of the mics there, and I can see the shapes of that. And this actually is kind of big enough, that I can, see and whatever. But, if your producer was winking at me, I wouldn't know it.
You're always flirting with our guests.
Yeah. If you held up, something against the outline of that, I'd see it. But otherwise, I lose a lot. So anyway, that's kind of where things are, but it went quickly. So the guy was very concerned, and he basically said, I don't know what this is. He said it could be. Actually, he said it could be a brain tumor, it could be MS, it could be... Anyway, most of the things revolved around something being neurological. He said, so I don't know any of what these 10 things are that they could be. He said, but 9 of them we treat with high-dose steroids. He said, so you're going to stay in the hospital immediately, and we're going to put you on high-dose IV steroids. So I went from driving around that day to immediately being booked in the hospital. Checking in the hospital the same day. So it was pretty crazy. And I was there for about 3 weeks on the high-dose IV steroids and then some other treatments, and then went home, and it was oral medication, very high dose of prednisone for quite a long time. And some other things, and then a lot of monitoring and tons of tests, tons of bizarre tests you can't imagine, just crazy things where they put like these kind of contact lenses in that have like electrodes to them, and you're like put your head in a thing, and they put like little like laser beeps, and you kind of identify when you can see them, and then all these things where they're like, shining all, I mean, it was just, it was many months of bizarre tests and what do you call it? One thing leads to another. The steroids reduced the immune system, which meant that I got these bacterial things. So then it was back to the hospital for 2 weeks of high dose IV antibiotics. And then it was on and on and on. And then, it was pretty much eventually determined. And then different things. I mean, there were some people, I went to tons of specialists who all thought that whatever their specialty was, they thought that's what it was. And then they'd finally, sometimes somebody, in fact, one point thought it was Lyme disease. And then, so I mean, it was just a lot of things because it was very much a kind of undetermined kind of thing. And then eventually, sort of consensus was that it was MS. I had some neuromuscular things that people thought maybe it was, but I also wasn't probably taking care of myself completely as well. And then some of the medications could have been side effects of that. I spent a year on a clinical trial study of this treatment at Mayo Clinic for vision loss due to MS. So they were pretty convinced of it at that point. And, Mayo Clinic's a cool place. That was kind of fun to experience,
Is it in Jacksonville?
It's in Rochester, Minnesota.
Okay. There's another one.
Okay, yeah.
So I was like, I didn't know if there was multiple. I hear it mentioned so much. I was like, I think there's more than one location.
Yeah, there may be, the main kind of, mothership is in Minnesota. So I went up there and anyway, and then I eventually, and it's funny, the prednisone, I found out later can cause deterioration of your hip joint. So I've had hip replacements due to the prednisone. So I mean, it's been a saga, put it that way. But eventually, I had a neurologist who I finally felt really comfortable with, and I got I had a lot of confidence in, and he was good. And he was funny. He did finally periodic MRIs. And he said, finally, part of the deal with vision loss in MS is that it comes back. He said it's like it's a marker of the onslaught of MS. He said, but typically it goes into other manifestations, but the vision comes back. He said yours has stayed gone. He said that's one signal. He said, and then the last MRI, he said it's clean. He said you don't have any plaques or anything on your brain and nothing in your whatever. He said, this is not MS. He said, I'm not, he said, I'm an MS specialist and I'm happy to work with you. And he said, always, I don't know, I can't remember what he said, something like, it's always a pleasure to see you and blah, blah, blah. He said, I don't have any reason to keep treating you for MS. And I was like, okay. So that was pretty much the last time I saw anybody on an ongoing way for thing, and my vision hasn't changed then. Eventually, it went, like I say, it was this eye only, and then it was both, and so they're both in the same way. And I don't drive. I don't use a smartphone because I'm not going to spend $500-600 on a phone that I can't see, and so I have a few things, whatever. But other than that, nothing has changed. I use I have a big machine it's basically a closed circuit television that I can put material underneath it, and the camera allows me to read things that way. But it's a whatever. I mean there are vision. I did years ago. I had a small thing, which is like a little small thing, and you ran it over things. And there's a lot of aids, and I know you may have seen me a minute ago. I have a flip phone, and I can use a magnifier that to use the text and things like that and see the numbers. But I adapt. I walk, and I use. Fortunately, I will say even that one thing about Dallas is that it is of all the places in Texas, it's probably got the best public transit far better than Houston and nothing. Austin. Even for a very truck-centered place to be, it's good transportation. I live very close to a DART train station, and I get around. And so like I say, it's been that way since 94. It's funny. I don't really think about it as much, as far as like how long ago it was or when. And that, I guess at this point it's 27 years or something like that, or something, or no, whatever, 20. I don't know. It's a long time ago. Yeah, 27.
So you never got like instantly depressed or?
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I have, like I said, I wrote a lot. I mean, initially I had this room that was this size and double that was lined with nothing but bookshelves filled with books. And it was kind of like, at first it was kind of like, well, all these books are staring back at me. And, before I got the reading machine that I could use. And, and like I say, I use a magnifier in the computer, for whatever. But, at a certain point, it was kind of like I just feel helpless. And no, I mean, I there were definitely a lot of periods of, I would say just plain old depression, and all the loss and all that stuff. When I first lost vision, I drank and I think it didn't help, initially that, I think I probably sunk a little bit there. I don't drink now, but it's just, and I mean, I'll be honest with you. I mean, sometimes there are, times when, just still, it's just, I mean, I'm where I am and I'm fine. But there are times when it's just like completely frustrating where you just, I don't know, just being out in the world and it just, I mean, I actually, during the pandemic, I haven't gotten out much. So, so it's, I mean, I take a walk, I walk a mile around my neighborhood and that's fine. But I mean, just like sometimes just dealing with people, sometimes you just, you just say to somebody, I'm a vision impaired person. I can't see something, blah, 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 blah. Can you show me where something is? And they're like, well, it's over there. And I'm like, I mean, I can just, we don't have enough time for the things that I've encountered in this way. I mean, one time I was at O'Hare and I said to the guy, I said, which line, I'm looking for this counter. I can't remember. It was American or whatever. I can't remember, I said, he goes, it's down over there. I said, no, can you just just help me? And finally I had to walk. And I said, finally, I said, I'm legally blind. I said, I just need you to tell me a little bit more, blah, blah. And he goes, you don't look legally blind. And I was like, what would that be? I'm sorry, I'm not carrying a cane for you. Or, all I'm saying is, there are certainly times when I don't feel like I get depressed over things, but sometimes you just it's maddening, some of the things that one might encounter. And again, partly is that I do have some vision. So I'm not, maybe that.
So when did the MS study end where you found out you didn't have MS?
Yeah, it was probably a good 3 or 4. I mean, I probably went 3, 4, or 5 years of the assumption was that I had MS. I don't remember exactly, but I mean, it was a long time.
I mean, like what year though?
Well, I mean, 99, 2000, somewhere in there.
So for the past 20 something years, you have not really. You haven't seen a specialist every day, or
no.
You're just like, this is the way it is, and I'm going to live my life and do my thing.
Yeah. No, I don't. I haven't been to a neurologist, since then, and I just go to the doctor for the things I go to the doctor for. I mean, it's not, but no, I mean.
So what do they know? I mean, it's not MS. Okay, so you just.
No, I mean, it could be a virus. What I have is I don't have anything that's actually wrong with my eyes per se. Oops, I think I may have. Do you still have me? Because I just heard myself. I might have kicked a wire or something like that. Is it in or out? I heard my own voice. Now I can hear it, so it's fine. Okay. Anyway, sorry about that. It could have been what it is it's the myelin coating of the optic nerve is depleted. So I don't get the signals properly. So, there's, there are people who say, well, it could have even just been a virus that attacked the myelin coating. It could be something that is basically an autoimmune kind of thing, but it's not named in a certain way. It could be, I don't know, anyway, just any number of things, but there's never been a, definitive diagnosis. And to be honest with you, at a certain point, I had been to so many doctors, I was like, I wasn't, it's nobody ever got the feeling that they were going to correct it. So I was like, I don't need to know. You know, I mean, you know,
there's no surge out there where they add a new coating or
no, there really isn't. I mean, I think actually some of the things that are associated with the stuff that Christopher Reeve was working on, and you know the actor, you know, who was paralyzed. I've read and heard that some of the things that came out of his studies and research and that kind of thing are things that potentially could correct, you know, those kinds of things, but it's not very far along. I had another year of taking interferon shots daily because they thought that the interferon could also maybe do something for the myelin. But other than that, I haven't heard of anything that would necessarily correct it or fix it, let's say.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, I can.
Does it affect your drawing just due to for how long you've drawn your whole life? So therefore you have a pretty good feel, I would guess.
Yeah. No, it's funny. I mean, I know that there's probably floating out there a kind of, you know, like somebody who thinks, well, can't see it anyway. What's he going to do? But I know what I'm doing. You know, I mean, I've been doing this long enough, and I also, if I get really close to something, I can see it, and I certainly can with my own work. And a lot of what I do is based on me, like I say, knowing it's more about the gesture or about the activity or more about the sort of performance of that activity more than it is about, you know, this skilled manufacturer of a certain kind of perfect kind of thing. And maybe that, I mean, the thing is, I know is that that's always the way I've been. And it's not, you know, I mean, I was like that before I had vision loss. My work was about a kind of gesture and a kind of materiality and a certain kind of, like I say, you know, just very simple materials. I mean, I've always been, you know, a lot of found objects. I mean, it's always been like that. So I know it's, you know, not something that I do because I can't see it. I mean, my own work, if it was, you know, on that wall, whatever that is, you know, 15 feet away, I mean, I couldn't, I mean, I would have some trouble seeing my own work, you know, but if I'm close, I can see it. I know what's going on. I know what I'm making, you know, yeah. I do things that, things I make are about, like I say, the surface, the material, all those kinds of things. So I don't feel like it's my work suffers from it. I mean, I make it, some things I think are probably, no, I don't know. I mean, I don't think I would probably do anything any differently if I could see better.
Yeah. That's really cool. Where do you pull inspiration from?
I think a lot of things I make, like I say, are about the expression of the material. As I mentioned before, there's a lot of the work I do refers to other art and other artists. There are a lot of references and a lot of quotation and things like that. There are a lot of things that are based on sort of some language events, whether that be a written text, a poem, something like that, an expression, a quotation. There's a lot of text in my work, actually, and a lot of writing and those kinds of things. And, you know, the last show that was in January, February at Conduit had a lot of references to music. So that's always been very important to me as well. So, yeah, like I say, a lot of times I do a lot of things where I want to pay tribute to either another artist or another somebody of some kind. And so sometimes it might start from there. Somebody, you know, a great musician passes away. I might do something that is trying to kind of evoke something about them, to pay tribute to them, to use my work to kind of, have them not forgotten, if that makes sense. So, yeah. The work isn't image driven, and a lot of times there isn't, let's say, like I say, a recognizable image or picture of something that's in the work. And sometimes there are people
happy trees.
No happy trees. No. Maybe some bark glued on there, but no happy trees. And sometimes people talk about something as being like, you know, abstract, and I I don't hold on to that because I don't. For me, a lot of times something that is an abstraction of something else, and it's like taking the form and then kind of transfiguring it into something. And it's like, for me, abstraction is about sort of like this thing that refers, or it's like takes elements of something. And my work's not about that. It's more, for me, it is actually very realistic, playing with things a little bit because it's very much about the surface, and it's about real stuff. I use, like I say, a lot of found objects and things. There might be like a sheet of cardboard that's pasted on there, maybe some fabric, maybe like coffee grounds that are like glued on, and so to me that stuff is very real, and it's not abstract in that way. I don't know if that makes any sense, but so I think of I really like using like real stuff in the drawings and paintings.
Do you ever change canvas type to be like an animal hide or like something that's more real?
No, I haven't done that, but I have altered. Like I say, I've used a lot of like real fabric to paint on and things like that. Not so much like.
What's real fabric?
Like just my old clothes and stuff like that. I use that as the surface. I haven't used anything that's animal in that way, but I've definitely done things that are like.
Yeah, some vegans would be pretty upset.
Well, vegans aren't going to like my work. I've made my own paint using like bacon fat and dry pigment and stuff like that. So, vegetarians wouldn't be happy.
How good did that paint smell?
After a while, it just by the time it gets to me, it's been it's not as vital, but I like doing things like that kind of change things a little bit. So, yeah. Chicken fat, bacon fat. I've used it.
Has anybody ever said something mean about your artwork to you?
Probably. Well, maybe, but I don't know. I think that for me, I think my work is such that people either ignore it and dismiss it and don't care, or they get it and they're fans. I don't. And I think the people who ignore it just kind of like, okay, well, I don't care, kind of thing. But I don't think anybody's been aggressive. Although, like I was saying, I think that there have been times when, like I say, I've given some talks, and there is that, kind of public response of somebody just in a completely wide open event where somebody is like, who do you think you are doing this, whatever this is, that kind of thing. I
love when artists fight because none of them like know how to actually fight. Yeah. Like punches are never going to get thrown.
Right. No, yeah. A friend said, you guys are all just haters. You all just hate everybody's work.
Yeah, that banana guy, I hate his work. Just kidding.
Oh, well, when I get back, I'll send you some other images, things to look at.
More things to make me mad.
Yeah, exactly. I think probably his most notorious piece is he has this sculpture that's about that tall, and it's like a little statue of Hitler praying. And, he's done things like that. So,
yeah, I'm sure everyone took that one well.
Oh, yeah. That's one of his most notorious pieces. Maurizio Cotillon always wants to piss people off. He lives for that. So.
Yeah, I do too, but I've never thought about applying it to art before.
Yeah. Well, no, actually, I would say, it's funny you say that because.
Like, I love stirring the pot. It's like just my favorite thing to do, but I've never thought about like creating art that does that.
I would say, that's a big, I think that's probably a driving force for much of the art that's made in the Western tradition over the last 100 or so years, actually, is being in,
Bob Ross is pissing no one off.
Pisses me off, actually. I hate that stuff.
Podcast is over. I'm done.
I didn't know this was the Bob Ross fan club. Had I known that.
Actually, who doesn't like happy trees?
It's so funny because somebody joked about it, and I realized I've never seen one of those shows, and I don't. I've glanced at it or something, but I've never like. I really don't know anything about him. Although, what was it? It was on NPR maybe like in the last like 6 months, there was some little remembrance about him. I don't know if it was, I don't know what the occasion was, but they were talking about him and how people loved him and this and that. So, no, but anyway, but I think that there's a steady impulse in, like I say, in the European and American context over the last 100 or so years to be very intentionally provocative. So it's not, Maurizio Catalan ain't the only one. So believe me.
It's just everything. I just don't know how these people make a name for themselves. Like, I don't know how they ever get people to pay attention to the things they're doing. And like, how do they pay their bills? How do they make a living? How do they live a life?
Well, it's funny. I would say some of the most, in fact, stirring the pot kind of artists are the ones who are in some ways some of the most successful.
I know. And so that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't know how they even get to a point of success. Like what is it? Social media that makes them famous? Is it?
Well, I think a lot of these artists who were certainly very provocative, or long before the
how they get their name out there,
long before the era of social media. The art world generates a lot of its own. It's a thriving, publicity machine.
Like, let's say, okay, day one, I'm now an artist. I'm no longer an entrepreneur. I make artwork. Pierre's my assistant. He helps carry my artwork. Just kidding. And
okay, so there are, one might approach a gallery to get shown. Once the work is, let's say, going to be shown, there's tons of, like I say, let's say this is before social media, okay?
Okay, so I walk into a gallery.
There's art magazines. There's, with ads for people to look at. When I was in art school, et cetera, you'd wait for the issue of Artforum to come out and see what the ads are and who's showing where, and people would go. And then there were reviews of shows in the newspapers and magazines and tons of reviews. Art critics are very influential. There are coteries of collectors who would just plain old spend, that's their deal. It's like, I'm going to go see what the next show at X, Y, and Z is, and they'll just keep going. And the gallerists court those people and offer the works for sale, and museum curators do the same thing. They would visit the galleries, visit artist studios.
Yeah. Okay, so my good friend Blake, who actually gets in town tomorrow, who's an artist, he was a digital marketer. Decided he wanted to be an artist. He'd sold his home, made maybe $100,000. I probably shouldn't tell the story because he's going to tell it tomorrow, or he's going to tell it Saturday when he's on. But whatever. Anyway, the point is, he decides he's going to go from absolutely nothing to an artist in MoMA in 90 days.
Okay.
And he hires a videographer, puts out a short film every single day of the art he's creating, the things he's doing, anything he can do to make it happen. And this whole journey never gets into MoMA, but it leads to him doing portrait paintings, with spray paint, portrait paintings for pro athletes. That's the niche he finds himself in, which then leads him into doing, what are the things that people trade? Yeah. What are the, sports cards?
Oh, uh-huh.
I didn't have a childhood. You ever seen The Other Guys?
Oh, no.
So it's this movie with Will Ferrell, and
I know what you mean.
He talks about how he's like, well, I audited my parents when I was 12, and let me tell you, I found some things. That was me. I was just this weird kid. Sports cards, those are what those are called.
Yeah,
so anyway,
cards,
so
which are huge now.
So
having a huge resurgence. Yeah, so.
He got into a company of making special sports cards that he had spray painted or worked on, taking an existing card and then would add his stuff to it. And now he makes a pretty good living doing that. And I've just never looked at if you look at art as a business, if you when I see the guy taping a banana on a wall, and I get that it's just to be an asshole, I'm sure it's his goal, and make people like me mad. I just wonder where, how do you get your name out there? It's Like, how did he get known in the art world? Are you saying that he just reached out to every place until one gave him a chance to display his art, and then he did controversial stuff, and since it was controversial, the media shared it, and then other art people or other art galleries were like, oh, well, this guy's controversial in Breen's eyes, we want him here, and that's like his career?
You know, I mean, the trajectory for everybody's a little bit different. I don't imagine. I mean, again, I don't want to be either a defender or a spokesperson for Maurizio Catalan, but I mean, I don't think he probably. I don't think he probably schlepped his things around to a lot of people, what kind of thing. I think he probably. I don't remember who his initial early supporter was, but I mean, I think it's one of those things that, once a certain kind of reputation is formed, then other people are interested. There are a lot of, there are a lot of artists or a lot of parts of the art world where because somebody is hot, everybody wants to jump on the bandwagon, which, is true for a lot of things, But like I say, I mean, I think that, again, I'm going to frame it as a pre-social media thing, just to sort of say that there was plenty of ways of getting the, whatever. I mean, but the world of critics, curators, publicists, all that stuff, is out there. And there are people who just are interested in what goes on in galleries, who just will go all the time. And again, the art world is, it's New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, and then there are satellites where, things happen. But I mean, it's very much driven by the major art world places as well. It's, so that, like I say, there are collectors who would, every Saturday would just go to all the galleries and, I mean, when you go to galleries, I mean, again, this is pre-pandemic, but I mean, you go to galleries in New York on a weekend in Chelsea, they're full of people looking,
Yeah. How do you meet collectors? How do you meet fans?
You mean artists or galleries?
Galleries. Like, how do you meet like really rich people that buy tons of paintings? Where do you find those people?
I think two things. One, I think they go to the galleries and they will express their interest in, in the art and the artists and that kind of thing. And collectors will, gallerists will court them and, try to present the work and that kind of thing. And then there are, there's many tiers of collectors too. They're like the huge big deal collectors, and they're going to be well known. And a gallery might reach out to somebody and say, I know that over the years you've collected so-and-so. Well, you might also be interested in this artist whom I have, and I'd like you to, entertain the idea of visiting the exhibition, and they might come in and see it, that kind of thing. It's a small world in some ways, and everybody kind of knows everybody else, it's that kind of thing. And like I say, most things are very much directed by and driven by major cities, as opposed to the big ones then there's, a few galleries in Atlanta, a few galleries in St. Louis, a few galleries in D.C., Boston, Philly, Dallas, Houston. Oddly enough, in Texas, Austin doesn't have a huge gallery scene because it's so tech and music driven. San Antonio doesn't have a huge gallery scene. Houston, it's got a huge gallery scene. Dallas has got a lot of galleries. But, once you get out of a certain kind of whatever, the demographics play themselves out in the ways that you can probably predict.
Yeah. I went to the Nasher. That place is crazy. In a good way. That was cool. But downstairs watched like the documentary on the founders.
Yeah. Ray and Nancy. Yeah.
And it's like, how do they get this much money? Is my only thought. Like, they were like, oh, we wanted, so-and-so to make a portrait of us. So we flew to Italy and he did it in his studio. And, it's like, how did they just would fly all over the world and like go to these artists and they make these sculptures for them.
Have you, I assume you've been to North Park Mall.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, all of that is driven by their collection as well. So, which I think is great. It's just, that they, a lot of collectors have their collection, but they really endeavored to get it out in the world.
Yeah. I want that gold bunny really badly.
Yeah.
It's been it's
Barry Flanagan's piece, I think. Yeah.
I don't know who that is, but I'm just going with it. Oh yeah, Barry. Good old Barry.
Yeah.
I wonder how many hundreds of millions of dollars they've spent on artwork.
Oh yeah, no, it's a significant collection that is,
Yeah. Do you know the guy that runs Nasher?
I know the director, and I know the chief curator and the assistant curator. I know them. I know many people who work there.
Because we've tried to get the director on the podcast. So.
Yeah, Jeremy's fairly quiet guy. I don't know that he might. Wow. He's friendly. He's a great guy. I like him a lot. You might. Yeah. I would say. I would say that you might also think about contacting Jed Morse, who's the chief curator, who's also very interesting and very smart and very.
This is what the film really doesn't tell us at the museum that we watched. When they died, do they have kids? Are their kids running it?
Yeah. Well, I know they do have kids because I've met a daughter. I don't know. The museum has its own. The family isn't fully engaged. It's more just
their name.
Yeah, when it's like the day-to-day stuff. Really, it's driven by the staff and the directors and all that kind of thing. So yeah, and then there's the Nasher Prize, which has been established. I think it's been about 5 years now, which is an international prize that goes to a significant artist and judged by a whole panel of important curators and historians and that kind of thing. I think it's $100,000.
Make it 200. No. I'll enter if they make it 250.
You don't apply. You get chosen.
They're going to choose me. It needs to be more money for me to accept.
I see. Yeah. Okay. You have you're not going to put up with it unless it's of a.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm going to throw a fit and hopefully get press about it. I'm going to tape several bananas on my wall and protest.
There you go.
So what's next for you? You just finished an art show.
I don't have a lot that's scheduled. I have a few things where I've sent out some feelers for some things. I have a curator who lives in New Mexico who has worked with me in the past, and we're working on a project to sort of have a little review of some works on paper. But we were all scheduled to try to get the word out right before everything happened.
February of 2020.
Yeah. So we kind of put that on the back burner.
Yeah, I had on yesterday. His book came out February 25th or something.
Yeah.
2020, just like the worst.
No, exactly. This is a curator and she and her husband ran a space in Chicago where I had a show, but they also are book publishers, and they just, again, it was the same thing. One of my books came out with them right about the same time, so we were all set to do a launch and a party and a this and a that, and it's like, well, we'll just do the book and it's not going anywhere.
Oh, so you've written a book.
It was March 20. So it's just kind of, it exists.
That legit is the worst date.
Yeah. So it's, I do have
was this a book of your art, or was this?
No, writing, all writing.
Okay. And what was it about?
They're all, I would say, experiments in kind of broken up essays, they're all kind of the essay form, but they're not straightforward by any means. They're kind of I would say they're kind of textual collages, put it that way.
I don't know what that means.
Different kinds of text that sort of pasted together in kind of odd transitions, some quotation next to a bit of poetry next to a thing. They're meant to be very fragmented and broken up kind of texts.
What's it about?
Culture. They're
This is way too vague for me.
Yeah, well, I'll have to. Actually, you know what? I have one book I can. Hold on. I was going to leave with you. And this is an old book. So, sorry. Can you hear me? This is an old book. I'll get back on mic. This is a book that is mostly images. It's an older piece, but I thought I'd leave with you guys just a little present. But then there are some texts in there that I've written, and you can get a little sense of it. There are some straightforward kind of poems in there, but then there's like one or two things in there where the texts are. You can get a little sense of it. I'm trying to remember where one of them. I can't even remember what it's called, but I mean, there's one longer text that is very similar to the work that are in the newer book. Well, you can just get a little sense of some of the things that I've done. So
I always think like I can't do art because I can't draw, right? And so then when I see you like put things like in this image here, I think like, okay, maybe I can write a piece about how much I hate the IRS.
Hey, I'm well. There you won't have much distinction because I'm sure there are many people who share your feelings.
See, I only know broad.
I'm just teasing you. I think I'm a believer that anybody can do anything. I think people are much more creative than they believe they are. But and again, I would say, if we were in 18th century France, there is an academy, and there is a group of skills that people would say these are the things that one must do to be, you learn a set of skills that everybody accepts as the one thing, and that's what it is, and that's what you do. But the world has changed and the world's broadened, and I think that there isn't one universal standard for everything that as there might have been at one point. The world's opened up.
So I see this, and my black and white mind goes, this is a painting that says, "Be right back."
Yeah.
What am I missing?
I don't know. What are you getting? It's a big piece. Actually, that drawing is about the size of this table. It's a play on a sign. It's about a play on using letter forms as I do a lot of the use of. Oh, I think I hit your. I'm a fidgeter. I think I might have. You still have me? I can hear myself now, so I think I might have just moved it a tiny bit. So. Sorry about that. I'm fidgeting. I do a lot of the ways I use text to sort of play on the kind of like in between place where something is both a letter form, a mark, the act of the hand, a sign, something that's written that plays on message making, but at the same time is just a physical mark. So it's a play in that kind of in between place where something that is drawn or painted takes a letter form. So it's kind of trying to play on what it is to say something. It's an ambiguous statement. It's talking about presence and absence. Like I say, it's a big piece, so it kind of looks like a big sign that you might see pasted on a door or something like that. So I don't know. I mean, it's a way of, again, talking about sort of presence and absence too, a little bit. So.
All right, that's one. We're gonna take my simple mind. You're gonna help me through this. This is next one. Can you see it? And then we'll do here. This one's clocks. Okay. This one is pretty.
Yeah, there you go.
So I see 5 clocks. And I feel, how big is this one?
It's like this from here, it's about that big.
Okay. Because I'm like, this is kind of cool. I'd like to see this in a house. Like, I can see this. Like, I like the yellow. But is there a hidden meaning to it? What is it? Are the clocks at different times? And when you add those times up, it gives you some answer. I'm always looking, like, when I don't.
I will see. This is one thing. It's funny. Art doesn't have a quote unquote explanation. It's not an additive, like geometry proof where, because of such, because 2, 3, and it's not, it's.
See, maybe that's me as a puzzle lover. Is that like, I love the idea that there's a hidden puzzle inside of it.
I also just think, there isn't necessarily a quote unquote hidden meaning in anything that I do. They are what they are. They're clocks. It's one of these things where I've experienced this a lot where sometimes And
are they clocks to everybody else, or?
Well, I think they're pretty normatively clocks. If somebody came in and said they all look like bears or, ducks, I'd go, really?
What if somebody looks at this as something insane that has nothing to do with the painting, but that's how they perceive it? Do you just go with it?
Well, again, I am a believer in consensus. And I think that normatively, certain things get seen and accepted, and a certain viewing public develops its own language and integrity and sort of whatever, so that people sort of accept that certain things mean certain things. If somebody, it'd be the same thing. Like, let's say you encountered somebody who, even in this context, let's say somebody was whispering, or you were whispering at somebody and they said, "Stop screaming at me." You'd go, "I'm not." But like, okay, you don't, all I'm saying is I think we just, as humans, I'm a believer in a sort of what would be called in the American pragmatist tradition in philosophy that we understand certain things are true because they basically are true. And, if somebody said, it looks like fish, I go, they look like clocks. They're clocks. Certain things are what they are. And if somebody has an aberrant kind of evaluation or judgment of something, then you kind of just have to like chalk it up to they got their own way of seeing something and you can't do anything about it. But 95% of people are going to see clocks. And so you kind of just go with that. Does that make sense at all?
No.
Okay.
It's just that you wanted to paint clocks. You painted some clocks. And
I was getting back to the point about what you're saying, like what happens if somebody says they just don't see clocks. It was like, I can't do anything about it.
Yeah, I get that.
Okay. But as far as why they are, they're just, I don't think it's that ambiguous. What clocks are about, sort of the passage of time, about time in general, about time spent, about different ways of measuring our existence. There's something that is, I think somewhat kind of, having them all be very different talks about the fact that we have different perceptions, we all have our own trajectories and we all have our own stories at various moments. It talks about that sort of difference, I think.
Yeah, so for me, like right now I'm on the nope one. Nope. And all I can think is like, okay, again, maybe it's just I just want more. I don't know what it is, but it's like I look at this and I think, okay, there is one green line underneath on 2 of the letters on the left, and then there's 3 red lines, and 1 blue line, 1 darker blue line, and then a yellow line. So each one of these lines represents something, and I have to figure it out. When in reality, you were just probably painting this, and you're like, it looks cooler when I add these red lines, right? Or,
I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but I feel like, getting back to what I was going to say a minute ago, is that I've done like a talks, every once in a while, and sometimes people are like, well, I understand. Whatever, it just I see that what you did, and it makes me feel really, let's see, maybe a little unsettled. I'm like seeing like the rough surfaces, and it makes me think about these kinds of almost like sandpaper and about whatever, and it almost makes me feel like I'm agitated, and I feel like I'm put in the past, and it makes me feel like the way that people have like accumulated things and the wear and tear of time, and I'm like, but I don't get it. And I'm like, you just said the whole piece. It's sort of like this. It's like sometimes, certain colors are there for the delight of the colors. The whole kind of like stubborny, kind of weird sign and writing of the thing is kind of like a note It's like a notation, and it's kind of like about that kind of like, it's supposed to be kind of funny also. And it's supposed to be kind of like about that kind of like refusal, like hold on, halt kind of thing. But it's also about the ways in which we make marks, but sometimes it's also supposed to be making the point that many, for me, a lot of drawing is closer to writing than it is to describing. It's really, drawings are extensions of what we do, like when we notate and write. So that's why I use a lot of texts and things like that as well. It's not like one color equals this hidden thing and this color equals this hidden thing, and this, you know, I mean, it's just not. You know, so.
No, I mean, I want to fully express I'm an idiot, you know, when it comes to this stuff. So I'm just asking, like, hey, I see this and I think, oh, there's this hidden thing that I don't get. But I get, like, the art is the art. And then when you're saying that people say, well, I feel this and I feel this and I feel this, and then say I don't get it, it's like, well, what you just felt was the goal, right? How big are these?
That one's about 22 by 30. Nope, it's not that big. It's probably, you know.
What's the largest you've ever done?
Oh, I have like a few drawings. I mean, the largest would be something like, 6 by 8 feet or something like that.
I think those are
on
so
paper,
cool.
Works on paper, that kind of size. The big paintings now are 5 by 7 feet, something like that. So, yeah. And then the sort of more moderate size paintings that I've been working on are like, what are they? Like 40 by 60 inches, I think.
What does a note painting cost?
I don't remember. Probably. I mean, that book was from 2007, so I don't know. The big paintings are
ballpark it.
That?
Yeah,
probably like 8,000, something like that.
Did people buy it?
No, not that. The paintings that were sold in the last show were somewhere between like 10,000 and 18,000, something like that. So I'm a very low priced artist.
That's still pretty dope, though. You can sell a piece of art for 18 grand.
Yeah, well,
I mean, I guess other artists sell it for $1 million. So, but in my mind, I'm like, man, 18 grand for a painting, that's pretty cool.
Well, the artists don't get all that too,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, what is it? I'm not asking your setup, but on average,
most galleries take half.
Okay. I mean, that's not terrible when you got to look at how expensive rent is and
no.
their gallery in general is.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. Do people get rich off of running a gallery, or do they do it because they just love doing it?
Well, I don't know if I mean again, in the same way that there's the huge range of artists and styles and everything, there are, there are the total superstar, top of the whatever food chain kind of galleries that are just make staggering amounts of money, and then there are places that, people keep the lights on and the doors open and they're happy and they make a living. I mean, so it's a huge range.
How do people get into doing so at Nasher? There's like the dude with giant hands, I think, or maybe he's got small hands. It's in the back. It's like in the lawn area.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Like these giant sculptures or these giant, like there was this one piece. It's like soldiers going up.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Silver.
The Jonathan Porofsky thing.
Yeah. How does somebody get into making pieces of art that huge? And how do they fund it? I've always thought, like, man, like, do they just save up doing other stuff? Or, like, how do they get to where they like have a warehouse where they can assemble such an enormous piece of art?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think, again, everybody who's in the sculpture garden there is, in the upper stratus of things where they have, huge facilities where you can make things. And some things, it really depends. Sometimes people might do something like be funded by a collector and it's a commission kind of thing, and somebody helps with the funding of something. Some things, somebody's artistic practice is just thriving in certain ways, and they just,
make it happen.
Put all the investment into the materials and make it happen. And, it's a big business, some of these things. And then, at a certain point, I think a lot of artists are of a certain stature that they sort of can guarantee that everything is going to sell, it's that kind of thing. So.
If I wanted to educate myself more, where would I start? I'm a big reader. I like to read a lot. What would you recommend somebody reads or listens to or attends if they want to just understand art and artists better?
Yeah, it's funny. There were a couple of galleries who were doing some things that are sort of about, just like introductory kind of ideas for, people wanting to enter the art world, that kind of thing. And they were giving some talks, but I don't think people are doing that as much. Two things I would say. I would say go to a lot of galleries, number one. Just go. There are opening nights where people people are finally opening back up again and doing openings. Just go. It's kind of a social event. Just go and look at things with people. The DMA, there's a huge museum education area. So I would say go to lectures, that are, offered by museums on sometimes just on broad categories and then sometimes on specific exhibitions and things like that. There are a lot of podcasts, which you could probably check out. I would say also, there are some art writers who are dense, impenetrable, and impossible to get through, but there are also some popular journalists who write about things in an interesting, more broad way. Somebody like Jerry Saltz is probably an interesting place to start, who writes for New York Magazine. And, he has definitely a kind of populist kind of position from which he operates from. I think it's an easy way to dive in and talk about things. And there are a lot of social media things where, people's, almost, like I say, a lot of critics put some of their work out in that kind of venue for you to, get into and quickly. In Texas, I think there's an online journalism. It's called Glass Tire. I think that might be an interesting place for you to look as well. It's not, it's serious, but it's not like this super, impenetrable kind of language and things like that. But it's very much about things that are going on. I would definitely recommend you look at Glass Tire, which, like I say, is very much focused on art in Texas.
Sweet.
So you could easily do that. There was a guy I remember. I don't know him real well, but he's an interesting collector, and he's kind of been around. And he used to work downtown, and every day at lunch, he'd just go to the DMA and go to one of the free lectures every day. And he felt like he just kind of educated himself completely. And now he's like fully enmeshed in the art world, that kind of thing. So, so there's a lot of opportunities to, spread your knowledge base.
So if somebody wants to connect with you, how do they do that?
Easily just, I think on my website there's a button for contact.
And we'll link it everywhere.
Oh yeah. I'm easy to reach. I like talking to people.
Well, if anybody can, figure out how to spell your last name.
Yeah. So. Well, the autocorrect will probably get you there a little bit. So, there's.
I don't know.
Yeah, it'll get you there. I'm easy to find on the internet. So there's a lot out there. So,
Stephen, thanks for coming.
My pleasure.
I appreciate it.
Fun. Yeah, it's good. Good deal.
I don't know if I know. I haven't doubled my knowledge, but I have increased it.
Okay, good. Baby steps are always good. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
And thanks for giving me all the details on Banana Guy. Sorry that I know it's not. I know that wasn't the point.
No. He very much wants to irritate. So it's like,
and it's good to know that you're another huge Bob Ross fan like me. It just feels great to just meet another Rossi night.
Happy trees, right? Yeah. Very good. Okay. Thanks a lot.